No Game, No Life, Volume 7, Chapter 1, Part 2, Closed Circle, Inverted Form. On the second space, Sora lay on the cart pulled by Steph, his arms and legs spread wide, and his body a bed for his tablet-prodding sister. He gazed vacantly at the game he had written off as impossible only 2 hours earlier while Steph berated him. So, are you going to give me a convincing explanation yet? Of what? What? You couldn't mean why I labeled myself the traitor. That was... Yes. It was to play me for a fool, wasn't it? I can see that much. Steph shrieked as Sora denied the reality, staring him in the face. Even I can see through pretense that thick. I can't believe you would think I can't. Indeed, there hadn't been a speck of truth in Sora's declaration of betrayal. It was 100% pure, not from concentrate bullshit. You didn't have to be a werebeast to see through that ruse. Even Steph could. But for that very reason, Steph found herself at a loss. I cannot fathom what you truly intend, but I know you won't let us die or kill each other. I trust you. With these awkward words, she handed Sora 9 of her own dice. Blanching, shaking, she surrendered the time she'd existed, her life. How frightening to see your lifespan shrink. But if, in any case, this was a game in which one's life and number of dice would decrease each time one advanced, would it be better to take them by force or kill each other indirectly? Weighing the balance, quaking in fear, Steph swallowed pathetically before resigning herself. Everyone looked askance at me as I bravely handed you my dice, and savagely declared they would betray us. It's on now, please, Izunat said cutely. To challenge you is an honor I hardly deserve, Jabril had cooed reverently. You'll regret having given me a chance, you know, Plum had threatened ominously. And die had been Ino's flat response with no further decoration. I had just started after them as they rolled their dice without so much as a second thought and went on ahead, all while you... All the while, Sora, accepting her dice and by extension 9/10 of her life, watched Steph regress to the equivalent of the single die she had remaining, 1.8 years old. Conversely, having gained 9 dice worth of time, Sora had become 34.2 years old. He'd smiled, a smile so nice it was creepy, and looked down at Steph. Gaining or losing dice only affects your body, but having more than 10 dice increases your age, huh? Okay, brother. Now that we've checked, it's all cool. Yeah, aight. Now then, we're gonna have you come with us. If you don't want to, you don't have to. That is... If you'd rather sit here alone with just one die, and wait for everyone to die, it's up to you. Oh yeah, and if no one gets there, everyone but the leader dies. Cheers! So how do you think I feel being experimented on and threatened by you in 5 words? Sora rubbed his chin as Steph howled at him. 5 words? That was quite the challenge. I can't take this anymore. Probably. Whoa, Mshiro! Exactly 5 words! No wonder you're a crossword master. You got it just right. I'm going to explode. Steph rattled the cart at the immediacy of Sora's answer, creating a racket. Gah! Wait! I mean, think about it. What do you think we're gonna say there except bullshit? Yes. Now that I think about it, it's quite natural, isn't it? Steph took a breath, then shouted self-deprecatingly. After all, even if you collect all the dice, you can't travel separately from Shiro, can you, Sora? There's only one person who would be dumb enough to take such bait. No one except me. Yes, there had been 2 rules Sora and Shiro never touched on. 04. Travel in company must first be declared, whereupon the company be advanced according to the role of one representative. 05. A company of more than 2 shall, of the dice used, lose a number of dice equal to the number of members of the company multiplied by the number of followers in it. They had to use these company rules to advance, and if you held more than 10 dice, you'd get older. If Sora collected everyone's dice, giving him 64, he'd be 115.2, dead by ordinary reckoning. Thus, Sora had stripped 9 dice from Steph, added 9 dice from Shiro, and, following the rules, declared travel in company and rolled 28 dice, 2 per person, a total of 6 lost. Look, get over it already. I gave you back your dice, didn't I? Sora redistributed them so that 3 each had 8 dice, but... Why did you make everyone betray each other? I'll keep up this caterwaulering until you tell me. Sora's objectives had, in fact, been consistent: to win over Steph. And, indeed, to encourage universal betrayal. Steph went on screaming to know why Sora had instigated the very event he had purported to avoid: mutual slaughter. Rather than answer, Sora simply did this. Huh? What is it? He placed his hands on Steph's cheeks and turned her face to look into his eyes. Gazing earnestly into her unconsciously blushing face, no longer full of rage, he said, Believe in me. With the power of love and courage and friendship, we can all win. You wait a punchline, yes? Why not reflect on your past? When asked why he'd lied about being the traitor, Sora had answered, Believe in me. Steph's icy response mirrored him in a dilemma. Wherefore believest thou not? How could you doubt my pure, so very pure heart? While you're at it, why don't you reflect on the present? Especially the part where you were using me as a horse. Steph's skepticism finally got to him, and Sora crumpled to the ground theatrically. He held her face in his hands and spoke earnestly. Sure, that sounded good. But what he'd actually been doing was forcing her to look backwards as she pulled the cart. As for what was supposed to inspire any faith in the situation... Yes, that's it. You got it. Sora spread his arms wide and boasted. Everyone agreed to a game where we can all win if everyone trusts each other and works together, even though I'm playing? Everyone agreed to a game where the Shrine Main's life is on the line, trusting in love and friendship and so on. Despite the fact that only the one who makes it first wins, and knowing full well someone's gonna ensure blank wins. Because I'm here? He emphasized his point twice. You think everyone's gonna trust me? From the very beginning, this game was predicated on distrusting him. When Steph realized how impossible it would be for them not to betray each other, she looked skyward and grumbled. What shall I do? Your argument is unassailable. This game, with so many strange points and seemingly complicated rules, was, in fact, simple. Per the fifth of the 10 Covenants, the party challenged shall have the right to determine the game. Since they didn't remember what happened before the game, they also didn't know whether the party challenge was the old days or Sora's crew. But either way, the game required unanimous consent in order to begin. Had they all consented to a cooperative game in which the bind would be the Shrine Maiden's life and the loss of their memories? How could this condition stand? If the conditions don't stand, then it's simple, see? Rolling once more onto his back on the cart, Sora laughed and placed Shiro atop his chest. If the rules were based on improbable conditions, then that means the rules themselves are a fraud. Something was explained. The first time, but not the second. The second? We swore by the covenants to start this game. We must have learned the rules before we started, but our memory's been erased. So there are the rules that only the traitor remembers, and there are the rules she told us. But they don't match. Sora's answer was lighthearted. It wasn't until after the game began and their previous memories were erased that they'd been told the rules. To top it off, the only one whose memories hadn't been erased was declared the traitor. How could you not suspect something? But frankly, who cares about all that? It didn't matter who the traitor was. No, to be precise, they'd started this game under a mutual agreement, and now Sora and the others were wearing backpacks. Regardless of whether or not they had their memories, these facts said everything. Sora grinned. Rather than the impossibility, asinine assumption that everyone would work together. Wasn't this the more likely scenario? Everyone started the game assuming we'd betray one another, and so, if they were to agree on something, wouldn't this have been it? Everyone filled in their own script where they would win. Sora grinned and grandly, loudly, nobly proclaimed, "Therefore, with purity, propriety, and beauty, overflowing with sincerity, your humble servant, I, Sora, virgin, 18, with 8 dice and aged 14.4 years, had the privilege of pledging on behalf of the party." He stood up, waved his arms about in grand theatrical gestures, and beamed. "Just say, we hereby pledge in the best of faith, according to the rules, to betray each other. Okay?" Above all else, they were certain to betray one another. Sora had trolled them by way of a reminder. Stuff stopped pulling the cart, turned and shouted, "That I cannot accept. All it means is killing. I do not consent." Right? That's how we know there's something off in the rules. Sora sat back down on the cart, laughing, and answered sarcastically. Rules that none of them would agree to were necessarily false, which meant we agreed to betray each other. In fact, it was our idea. However, we didn't agree to kill each other. That's all there is to it. The sounds of the cart rumbling across the plain echoed once more. In stuffed silence, unable to argue but unconvinced, Sora chuckled to himself. Yeah, that's how it is. It was only natural that a sensible person like Steph wouldn't be swayed. After all, if you broke down Sora's claims, under Grandpappy's name, he swore with fervent eyes. I figured it all out. The culprit is us. Indeed, mutual trust and cooperation would be futile with this group. But to jump from that all the way to traitor felt too much to Steph. See, we have to betray each other. It's supposed to be some sort of prisoner's dilemma. Having resumed her burden with the cart, Steph craned her neck to face the self-satisfied and sarcastic Sora. Prisoner's dilemma? If the party worked together, someone would win, and everyone's lives might be saved. But one who betrayed the rest could win alone. Meaning, if everyone approached the game that way, it was all the more likely that everyone would lose. It's a famous scenario in our old world. Put simply, a detective offers prisoners A and B a plea bargain under the following conditions. 1. If they both keep silent, both serve 2 years. 2. If one confesses, he will go free while the other serves 10. 3. However, if they both confess, both serve 5. If the prisoners trust each other and keep silent, each achieves a better outcome, 2 years. But if they both pursue their own benefit, they will invariably serve 5 years. If one betrays the other, he goes free while the other serves 10. This means that the option to keep silent is effectively non-existent. One must confess, betting on the possibility the other will keep silent. In doing so, one avoids the worst-case scenario of 10 years, while allowing for the best-case scenario of freedom. Hence why it's called a dilemma. On top of that, in this game, the old days kindly informed them that there was a traitor. In this kind of situation, it was like saying, but someone already confessed. Trusting one another when there had already been a betrayal before the game had even commenced made no sense. Then you mean we should betray each other? Is that not precisely what the detective wants? Okay, so trusting each other was pointless, leaving them with no option but betrayal. But if that was the case, weren't they playing right into the hands of the detective, the old deus? It was quite unlike Steph to reach the crux of a problem. She looked uneasy. Sora smiled and corrected her. Nope, it's just what we want, because this scenario isn't a valid dilemma. Pardon? If you trust each other to betray you, you can get an outcome even better than the better outcome. The best outcome. Sora's and Shiro's thin smiles contorted creepily, and they continued. Fundamentally, this game, like all their games, revealed their approach in its entirety. The philosophy of Sora and Shiro, the greatest gamers among humanity. Blank. The fact that, past or future, whoever the opponent might be, the reality of the present was immutable. Specifically, no matter what game it is, we have already won before it began. That is all there is to it. Everything was encompassed within the schemes they had already finagled and woven together. Nothing, not even a god, could escape their web. The pair who spoke so boldly and arrogantly caught Steph's shoulders shaking. Well, if we can see the game through to the end, that is. Huh. I'm done too. I want to go home. The next moment, the siblings watched Steph's shoulders drop. Their keen, bold eyes had drifted into the reality they'd valiantly tried to avoid, the board stretching across the sky. Their gazes instantly clouded over, leaving voices overwhelmed by life in their wake as the pair collapsed in the cart. If you're gonna act tough, could you please carry it through to the end? Suddenly, bereft of strength, Steph began panting, her eyes half closed. Deep down, Sora concluded, losing all their dice, their lives. There was no way and failure by betrayal, by pilfering. There was absolutely no way. Betrayal and killing are, like, whatever. We've got something else to worry about. His eyes glazed over, having dismissed everything so far as whatever. Sora gave Steph no time to object as he continued with a grim expression on his face. This is the real shit. Of all things, our most likely path to defeat would be. He gazed upon the vast, endless game board and named it. Starvation. He was serious. Eh? What do you mean? I vaguely suspected, but have you really not noticed? Ignorance is bliss. Those are deep words. Steph toed her head in confusion, and Sora and Shiro smiled, albeit with eyes like dead fish. Yes, all passengers, would you, kindly direct your attention to your left? The only passengers were Sora and Shiro. Steph looked to where Sora had gestured like a tour bus guide. There she saw, on the surface, floating on the sea, the islands of the Eastern Union. To the left, not below or above, there was land to their left. Oh, and next, would you please take a look to your right? Now what might this be? It was the all-too-colossal Sugoroku board created by the old Deus. Spaces of land spiraling, floating without support, piercing the clouds and yet stretching farther into the heavens. You may have seen this more than a few times in video games set in fantasy worlds. Masses of rock that float in the air, heedless of gravity, in a stage where you walk on them. Like the last dungeon of Final Fantasy IX, or the lagoons, or the Kingdom of Zeal, or what have you. So you walk up one of those rocks and gradually tilt 90 degrees to a horizontal position. Common sense would dictate you should fall, but some kind of uncommon sense applies here that says you don't. Here was a gathering of such ridiculous rocks going around picking fights with gravity and natural law, swollen so that each was the size of a city and labeled as space. Hundreds of them spiraled upward beyond the atmosphere. The audacity to claim that this was a Sugoroku board. Have you pictured it now? Given the circumstances, it's inconceivable that one spontaneous utterance would be how pretty, but more appropriately. What a screwed up, massive game board. Yes, it was screwed up, and it was massive. Yes, an freakishly huge game board. And after walking for 5 hours, where might we be? The second space, I suppose. Yes, the second space. In other words, the second rock. That's right! With these facts in mind, now, the question you broke down the door of a house to pose, specifically while we were holding ourselves up, is about to get its long-awaited answer. Sora drew in a long breath. It's too friggin' big! It's too goddamn far! We walked 5 hours and crossed one space after rolling a 62! How many days or months is it gonna take? Take. In the game space to write it as too friggin' big, Sora's cries echoed fruitlessly, and just as fruitlessly faded away. It's the game of an old Deus. Shouldn't you expect it to be out of this world? Sora sneered at Steph's halting derision as she halted the cart. I see. Huh? That's true. I have seen shitty devs like this who think just making the map meaninglessly big and cool means the game will be fun. This is what you get when you replace skills with budget, right? It was the same impression he had always had seeing fantasy worlds where someone had gone to all the time and trouble of building cities in the air. Sure, he couldn't even imagine how much power would be required to achieve this, but... Why? Of all things, why did you have to float land in the air? Picking fights with gravity for no reason seemed a perfect example of a waste of energy. Faced with a literal divine feat, Sora still insisted. Virtual life's good enough. Then, after making this huge damn environment, they tell us it's a one-track railway, and with long load times to boot. This is the worst fake open-world shit I've ever seen. It wasn't even load-free. It had been about 2 hours earlier before Sora and Shiro had holed themselves up after deeming their game impossible. They had walked for 5 hours toward the space indicated by the pips on their dice, 62. Finally, they traversed one space to stand at the border, the end of the Earth. From there, they were transported to the next space in roughly the amount of time it took to cook cup noodles. Then, standing on the second space, Shiro had faintly mumbled. Number of steps, to this point, 20,834. Even to Sora, who was not the math specialist, no further explanation was needed. Shiro's current height was 131 centimeters, and her gain approximately 0.48 meters. From that, you could extrapolate the size of one space. Approximately 10 kilometers. They were automatically transferred the several kilometers between spaces. Even if you discounted that last bit under the assumption you didn't need to cross it, the board twisting through the heavens was 350 spaces, meaning it's 3,500 kilometers to the goal. And she told us, get there on foot, bitch. No fast travel. Sora smiled. You don't say. At Steph, who was slow on the uptake. Perhaps this was a clearer way of illustrating it. It was the approximate distance to cross the U.S., or to walk the entire perimeter of Honshu, the main island of Japan. Wait. Maybe a better analogy for a resident of this world would be... It's roughly the distance from the western edge of Elkia to the island of Kanagari. That clear enough? Sora's clarification extinguished the light from Steph's eyes. Conversant as she was in politics, diplomacy, and trade, she had to have known just how far that was. Even Elkia's fastest high-seas sailing ship would require, on average, half a month. Not to mention, the trio would be traveling off-road outside in direct sunlight, and, since their dice were dwindling, as children. Under these conditions, Steph had the audacity to ask why they'd hold themselves up. To put it bluntly, that was no different from asking a mole why he dug himself a hole. In this game, if you get down to one die, you can't go any farther. In other words, until everyone's down to 1 or 0, it's not gonna end. It was one of those games that could go on forever. You really had to be in it for the long haul. And the longer it dragged on, the more everyone but Jabril, who didn't need food or sleep, would languish. Sora smiled, his mouth so dry you could practically hear it chapping, and admitted why he dismissed everything, cast it all aside, and hidden himself away. Walking that distance isn't even possible, is it? We're only flesh and blood, you know. We get hungry, we get tired. From a biological perspective, from any rational point of view, that distance would kill a person. In the days of old, it is said that humans from the southern tip of Africa crossed the majestic Eurasian continent. They traversed Indonesia aboard wooden vessels and even made it as far as America. But the fortitude of these primeval humans had long since been lost to their descendants. In particular, the heaven-sent children of civilization, the two Shun gamers, hadn't a drop of it left. Walking one space for 10 kilometers had delivered them to death's door. This was modernity. Reality. No matter how their victory might have been assured before the start of the game, I presumed they saw it through, right? Factors independent of the game, such as their lacking fitness or the passage of time, would destroy them. This was, by Sora's reckoning, the most absurd, and therefore the most realistic and conceivable, form of defeat. He looked at Shiro, who faced despair anew, and Steph, who had only now been plunged into it. Smirking, he was reminded once more of the line from that one game's main character. I wonder where I went wrong. Steph would have answered that they'd gone wrong when they'd holed themselves up. But that wasn't it. They were challenging a god. They were in the midst of betrayal. If they lost their dice, they'd lose their lives. If they lost the game, they'd lose their lives. You could rattle off any number of fearsome-sounding statements like these, but the fact remained. If they starved, they'd die. Faced with the all-too-real, and therefore easily understood, threat of this singular sentence, nothing else mattered. At this, Sora asked, "Where did I go so wrong as to agree to these rules?"